hot-footing it from a primary school in Kilkeel in the heart of the Mournes, Maynard Hanna. It's a good Mournes name.
It is indeed, very common name in Mourne.
It is indeed.
Yeah.
And community relations is important to you, and the Community Relations Agency, we're lucky enough for you to be representing them today at the school.
Well, not entirely as the case. I was working and assisting in an educational project to do with drama at the school today. And how would you say, I was acting as an introduction on the part of staff who had worked with the Lyric Theatre to assist with a World War I drama primary school project. And that's where I was at this morning.
So the significance of that in terms of community relations in Northern Ireland, because it always seems to me that we're very good at painting the picture of history to suit whatever community we're talking to, and we lose the overall picture.
Well, I would like to disagree with you there. I don't think we are very good at painting history, because history is always told from one side of the coin here.
That's precisely the point I was making.
Yes,
maybe made it rather badly.
Yes, there's three sides to every story usually. There's my side, your side, but the truth is always somewhere down the middle, and it does tend at times to bounce off either side. And you know, it's the same thing when you want to talk about bonfires or want to talk about the Battle of the Boyne. I mean, I remember not been so long ago at the Boyne, and the lady there was saying basically this was a Protestant army north of the Boyne, 35,000, Catholic army south of the Boyne, 25,000. It's easy to see who'd won. Now that's so far from the truth.
Absolutely.
Because William's army was very much mixed religion, and part of, most essentially, the professional element of the army most definitely was almost 50-50 mixed religion.
Yeah.
So you see, it's trying to get a perspective whereby one arrives at a point to tell as close to the truth, the whole truth, as possible. And that's what's wrong sometimes. I believe in community relations. To build a better community, you need education.
Yeah.
Because education at all times, it can remove fear, it removes suspicion, it takes away, even to use a simple word, stuffiness. And it introduces into the whole equation, how do you say, a new forethought, a new thinking. Yeah. And that's what you should always try to encourage, I think. Anyway.
Clearly you're passionate about the new thinking, the fourth element, if you like. Do you sense we're willingly going along the road towards that, or have we been dragged screaming?
We've been dragged kicking and screaming, I think. And I think there's a lot of people who could do more, who are turning their heads away and doing nothing. And there's a lot of people also who are saying, that's not really my problem. I can enjoy my Saturdays and my Sundays, whether it be in the golf course, whether it be playing football, whether it be out on a boat or whatever. So it's not really my problem. Let these other people deal with it. And that's what's badly, badly wrong. And I think that we should have an emphasis again coming back into our school system, whereby children and young people and teachers are used to best effect to educate young people about maybe what somebody else views something as being slightly different in the manner in which you view it. And to encourage acceptance of that view. That's what's important.
It's important, but it doesn't, maybe I'm wrong, it doesn't seem to me that an awful lot of it is happening.
You're 100% right. And so little of it is happening. And for whatever reason, and it's disappointing, and I think until we arrive at this point, until we arrive at that juncture, and people of influence arrive at that juncture, and are prepared to say, yes, you know, let's start and educate young people here to an extent whereby not only can they appreciate the truths of history, they can learn to respect the lessons of history, and in doing that can also respect another's interpretation of what previously they would have seen as my history.
And Maynard, we're not necessarily saying here integrated religion and integrated education.
No.
We're looking at something totally different in that I want to appreciate you who you are, you want to appreciate me who I am.
Yeah. I mean, if I grow up and I kick a football and somebody else kicks a rugby ball, they're two slightly different in shapes. But at the end of the day, I can appreciate the other guy getting enjoyment out of that game that I get out of my game. I had a friend once, still have, Dr. Noel Flannery, and he says, you know, life in society, Maynard, is like a salad bowl. And in a salad bowl, you can have red apples, green apples, bananas, twisted out. oranges, grapes, pears, all different shapes, all different colours. Take or remove any one from the salad bowl and it's losing something.
Yes.
Add it back in, it's gaining something. And he says, you mean like a pot of soup? He says, no, because when you mix everything in soup, it loses its colour, it loses its identity. The salad bowl retains its shape, retains its colour, retains its identity, and each item helps and enhances the other. And I think that's an excellent...
I'm bound to ask you, where have you been hiding? We need to hear these things.
No, I work away as best as I can, and I tell my story as best I can in whatever company I find myself. And I've always believed that you should have the ability to stand up for what you believe in, any place, at any time, and in any company. And if you can't do that, then what you believe in is not really worth standing up for in the first place.
Where do you come from? What's your motivation?
Well, I'm a Mourne man. I'm very, very proud to say that I'm a Mourne man. And what's my motivation? It's maybe to leave this world, and hopefully to leave it, that is offering my children and my grandchildren a better opportunity and a better place than I had. And having said that, you know, in my lifetime, and probably in your lifetime, we've all travelled a unique journey. I was brought up in a fishing, farming and building construction community, and I had the privilege of grandparents who were farmers. And as a consequence of that, when the potato crop was being taken out of the ground, I would have found myself in a potato field gathering purdas, as we would have called them, with our neighbours who we wouldn't have met before because they went to a different school. Yeah. You know, the funny thing about these neighbours was that the same colour eyes as I had, and the same colour hair as I had, and the same colour skin as I had, and they talked the same language as me, and they liked and they hated the same football teams as me. And I always found I could have a great time with these guys. And you know, we played sport, and it was a mixed basis down at home at Kilkeel, and I always took great enjoyment in that. And sadly, over the last 30, 40 years, and particularly with the demise of that type of farming and health and safety that comes in now, no potato gathering, no threshers, no balers, a lot of that has been lost. And then when I went to work in Belfast, I seen an entirely different community, a community that really is so isolated, so split, and doesn't communicate, doesn't cross over, doesn't have no linkages, and it's a sadness. It really is.
I have grandchildren too.
Yes.
We're on schedule,
yes,
not to leave them an awful lot.
Well, you know, you've got to keep working. You just cannot give up. You've got to keep working. You've got to keep trying. And that's what I was trying to do with regards to the bonfire thing. And, you know, and first of all, it's not bonfire, it's bonefire.
Bonfire?
Bone. Because people attribute the name bonfire, it's come from the French word bon for good, which is rubbish. The good Dr. Johnson got that wrong. It comes from the old tradition, Middle England, bone, as in bones, bones fire. And you would have got a lot of people at home still refer and still say bone fire, and that's the correct terminology.
And the derivation of bones, what bones were they burning?
Well, I'd just say in the olden days, the wealthy would have been buried in sacred ground, and the very wealthy would have been buried within the framework of buildings that were churches or whatever, and the poor was just buried in dribs and drabs in the surrounding area. And a lot of the time these people were dug up and their bones was collectively destroyed by fire, and it became a great bones fire. And then of course it was a means of execution at that time, bones fire. And it moved on from that, and from certainly the time of Elizabethan England, when bonfires were used to warn of the approaching of the Spanish Armada. And as a consequence, the Spanish Armada was destroyed by fire ships. And leading on from that again was the deliverance of King James at the time of the 5th of November bonfire plot, Guy Fawkes. And the thing to remember about that people often forget, is if the Guy Fawkes had been successful, the Bible, as you and I, the King James Version of the Bible, never would have been printed, never would have been written, and history would have undergone a massive, massive change. And Simon Sharma, in his 2000 television series, made the quotation following Guy Fawkes. At that time, for the British, bonfire became the vocabulary of freedom and democracy. And that's a pretty powerful quote, and I wouldn't dare to presume to argue with Sharma and his undoubted reputation, but it's a powerful quote.
Time will tell, and frost tries the potatoes.
That's right.
The time has moved on. There have been many crops.
That's right.
And we see today bonfires being used in some similar kind of way.
Yes, well, this is a sadness. It's about trying to educate people that it's the significance of the thing. I remember walking up to a group in Belfast one time, and last year, and they were constructing a fairly hefty object, shall we say. And I watched them, and they suddenly realised I was amongst them, and they didn't know who I was. And they said, "Well, what are you on about, master?"
Yes.
To which I said, if the king himself rode up here on his horse, he would look at you and he would say, "This is not what I was about." And he would turn his horse and ride away. And first of all, they didn't seem to realise what the king or who the king was I was talking about. Because William III, another thing that people seem not to appreciate was when he became king, the first thing he saw to go through Parliament was the Bill of Civil Religious Liberties, insomuch as he wanted for others the same as he demanded for himself. And that bill is still in power to this day. And although the United Kingdom does not have a constitution, that's as close as what piece of document it does
Civil
have.
and religious liberty.
Correct. And I honestly do believe if the king himself was resurrected and rode up around some of these events and happenings at that time, it would cause him considerable abhorrence, because I just don't believe that. In fact, I would be very, very confident saying it's not what he was about. But if he went to a family occasion where the family was all there, and children and the elderly were there, and they were having a celebration of his achievements, he would get off his horse and say, "Can I join you?"
Absolutely. But I mean, you are totally and obviously of good heart. How do you know? But what your message is of good heart?
Yes.
There's no gainsaying that. How do we get this logic and common sense brought forward?
I don't know, but I always believe if you continue to tell the story and tell the truth of the story and get one or two people involved in the better telling and in the execution of what it is you're describing. I think down in my hometown of Kilkeel, the 11th night bonfire has become something which is a huge event. It's a tourist event. It can invite in anybody and everybody. I've had friends from all over the kingdom.
So it's working there?
Yes, very, very much so, big time.
You see, when I was with the BBC in Belfast many, many years ago, we would have had, and you would have had Catholics and Protestants there together, we would have had some friend's house where we would have an 11th night.
Yes.
And the whole lot of us would be there. And we'd light a fire and we would celebrate. And it was always full of good feeling.
Well, that's what it should be about. That's what it should be about. And that's got to be the target, to try and restore that. I mean, where I come from at home, in the townlands, you would have local people.
Yes.
Would stand out every 12th morning to watch the local band, the local lodge, heading off down the road. Yeah. And when it was a local family priest, even I witnessed that. And quite often it was last 6 or 7 12ths, and I'm waving, saying, "Right, Tom, right, James, right, Billy, have a good day, right," or whatever, right, Francie, "Oh, enjoy yourselves," or whatever. And to me, that's just great. That's the way people should be, and that's what we're going to try and strive for. But as I said at the very outset of our conversation, I feel there's an awful lot of people who seem to say, "This is not my fight. This is not part of what I want to be involved with." But I'm afraid that's welching. That's it's throwing sometimes the responsibility on others who are less able to make the fight.
In a funny kind of way, Haas offered us an opportunity to get the real grasp on it.
Well, you might be better informed than me, but I couldn't tell you what Haas offered us, because, again, you heard the right side of the argument, you heard the left side of the argument, but I never heard what the argument was.
But a wise man
and you and I were kept in the dark.
Yeah. A wise man might have stood up and said, "Listen, Dr. Haas, we know that the way it is at the moment is wrong. We know that the way the king intended it to be was this.
Yes.
Please, may we look at it in a new context. You might have been the man to have said that.
But I wasn't at the table, and I don't think I'll ever be anywhere near the table. And, you know, I'll leave that to the good people to sit down at the table, and I hope they agreed to sit at the table and carry on.
It's a start, isn't it?
It is. But for me, my start is still, I'll go around groups and I'll go around talking. I mean, it wasn't so long ago I was speaking to a bunch of youngsters in Belfast where there had been a lot of negativity surrounding the Polish community.
Yes.
And I went into these youngsters and I said to them, right, what nationality are you? And they told me they were British. Well, they told me they were Ulstermen. Like, one or two said they were British, but most said they were Ulstermen and Northern Irish. And these are 16-year-olds, 17-year-olds. And I said, well, have you heard of the Second World War? And he said, oh, I've heard of the Second World War. And I said, well, what was the day when the British nation faced its greatest threat? What day, what date? None of them could tell me, so I told them it was September 15th, and it's become known as Battle of Britain Day. And on that day, the Royal Air Force took on the Luftwaffe, considerably outnumbered, possibly 4-1, but the RAF survived the day, and the Luftwaffe never come back to fight another day. And ultimately, it's gone down in history as the Battle of Britain. But on that day, one squadron of aircraft flew of its own nationality, spoke their own language when they talked to each other in the air, and shot down over 50% of the German aircraft on the day. And do you know what nationality that was? They guessed everything. Australian, Canadian, American, Brazilian, Argentinian, everything. And they gave up, and I said, well, I'll tell you, it was the Polish.
Yes.
The Polish people. And says, you owe those people a tremendous debt, because but for those Polish airmen, we might be all speaking German now and shouting Hail Hitler. So the next time you meet a Polish child or a Polish person out on the street, touch your hat and say thank you, because you owe them a big debt. And that was that. I left the room, and about 2 or 3 weeks later I got a phone call back, and he says, that was fantastic. We haven't had an incident here in 3 weeks.
Wow.
That's a simple story, but it's a true story, a very, very true story.
Yeah.
And you know, it's a story that should be told a bit more often.
Absolutely.
And it was well enough told in the film Battle of Britain.
Yeah.
And it's fair to say.
But you're going to keep telling it. You're not disheartened.
No, you can't allow yourself to be that way. You've always got to keep battening out the crease. You've always got to keep there. You've always got to stay there. You've always got, I mean, as I said, what my father said, if you don't believe in what you're saying, then it's not worth saying. No. And if it is worth saying, continue to say it. Yeah.
And you're at the right level of society. You're talking very often to young people.
Yes.
You're planting good seeds.
Well, I would hope that. I would hope that. When I go back home to Kilkeel and I look at things, and we all have our own heroes. And one of my heroes was a man that nobody knows nothing about. It was a guy called Eamon McCrink. You had never heard of Eamon McCrink.
No.
But when I was a child of about 8 or 9, my father used to go out to watch Kilkeel play football. And they had a goalkeeper called Eamon McCrink. And one of these first ever games, Kilkeel was playing this team and a penalty was awarded. And that was the first time I had ever seen a penalty. And there was a fair size of a wee crowd watching this game this day. And all the young people run to the back of the goal expecting to see the ball hit the net. And I stood out, and I remember, as I tell you, McCrink dived low to his left, caught it with one hand and held on to it. And that was the first penalty I ever seen saved. I never met Eamon McCrink, and I never spoke to him. But the biggest joy in my life is I'm an Evertonian. And about 5-6 years ago, Alan Ball died. And Alan Ball was my great childhood hero. And I wrote a letter into the local newspaper at home. And I said, it was a sadness about Alan Ball. But I also noticed from the death column that Eamon McCrink had passed away. And whilst Alan Ball was an all-time great, for me, Eamon McCrink would also be an all-time great. And I got a lovely letter in from his wife about 3 weeks after this, saying, she found it very emotional that somebody who'd never met would have written this about him. But he'd left an imprint on me, and I ended up doing goals myself and playing for Kilkeel over the years and playing a goal. And it was all from seeing this man, Eamon McCrink. And I don't know who done goals for Down the first year that Down won the All-Ireland, but if he was a better keeper than Eamon McCrink, let me tell you this, he must have been some keeper, because I seen Eamon McCrink for 3-4 years of my life, and McCrink was a good one.
What a lovely story.
It was a good one.
You keep talking and influencing the young people, just as you were influenced.
Well, that's it, you know, and I think sometimes through, if you can tell an accuracy in a story, tell it sometimes with a bit of humour, and tell it sometimes in different places, in different nights, but tell it the same story. And some people will appreciate it, and some won't, and some will take issue with it. But like, you still got to stick to the truth of the story.
And we're talking, and we're talking.
That's the thing. We're not clodding, you know. We're talking. Thank you.
God love you.
Cheers.
You're a good man.
Ta-da.